Looking back now, I think the universe has a peculiar sense of humor about these things. I spent 42 years healing animals, dedicated my entire professional life to the welfare of creatures that couldn't speak for themselves. And somehow that very passion became the mechanism through which I lost nearly everything I'd worked for. The elephant sanctuary that consumed 590,000 pounds of my retirement savings never had a single elephant. Never had enclosures or feeding stations or veterinary facilities. It was 14 rai of empty scrubland in the mountains outside Chiang Mai that would have cost maybe 2 million baht to purchase outright. I paid 19 million baht. The math alone should have told me something was catastrophically wrong. But when you're convinced you're saving lives, when you're certain you've found your life's true purpose after decades of searching, mathematics becomes inconvenient noise you learn to ignore. My name is Cedric. I'm 66 years old, British. Spent my career as a veterinarian in Surrey. Started straight out of university. Small animal practice initially, dogs and cats mostly. The usual parade of ear infections and dental problems, and the occasional foreign body removal when someone's Labrador ate something spectacularly stupid. I was competent, but I never loved it the way some vets do. The work felt transactional. People brought sick animals. I made them better. They paid. Everyone went home. There was no deeper meaning to it. No connection to anything larger than the individual transaction. I kept waiting to feel that sense of purpose everyone talks about. That conviction that you're doing exactly what you were meant to do with your life. It never came. 42 years passed and I was still waiting. I married young, 26, a woman named Sarah who worked as a nurse at the surgery next door. We had what I suppose could be called a marriage. 2 children, a house in Guildford, annual holidays in Cornwall, or occasionally Spain if we were feeling adventurous. We existed parallel to each other rather than together. She had her routines. I had mine. We intersected at meals and social obligations. The children grew up, left for university, got jobs in London and Manchester, started their own lives in which we were peripheral characters. Sarah and I looked at each other across the dining table one evening when I was 63, and both realized simultaneously that we had nothing to say to each other. Had probably never had anything to say to each other. We'd been fulfilling the social expectations of marriage without ever actually building a relationship. The divorce was amicable and swift. She kept the house. I took my share of the savings and moved into a flat in Dorking. 3 months later, she was dating a dentist she'd known for years. They looked happy in the photos on Facebook. Happier than I'd ever seen her during our marriage. I kept working until 65, retirement age. The practice I'd joined as a junior partner 40 years earlier had been sold to a corporate group. They offered me a buyout package, generous enough. Combined with my pension and the divorce settlement, I had about 735,000 pounds. More than enough to live comfortably for whatever time I had left. The problem was I didn't know what to do with that time. I'd spent 4 decades getting up at 6, driving to the surgery, seeing appointments until 6 in the evening, driving home, having dinner, watching television, going to bed. Repeat. The prospect of another 20 years of that without the surgery in the middle felt like a prison sentence. I needed something. Purpose. Meaning. Something that would make the remaining years feel like they mattered. A colleague suggested I volunteer with an animal charity. Said there were organizations doing wildlife rescue work overseas. Places where veterinary skills were desperately needed and funding was always short. Retired vets could make a real difference. She gave me some websites to look at. I spent an evening scrolling through photos of elephants and orangutans and gibbons, reading about habitat destruction and the illegal wildlife trade and animals being rescued from terrible conditions. For the first time in years, I felt something stir. This was it. This was what I'd been missing. The chance to use my skills for something that actually mattered. Something beyond treating Mrs. Henderson's Persian cat for its recurring bladder stones. I could help animals that genuinely needed help, animals that were endangered or abused or orphaned, animals that couldn't be saved without intervention. This was purpose. This was meaning. I booked a 3-week volunteer placement at an elephant sanctuary in Chiang Mai, January, middle of the cool season. I'd never been to Thailand. Didn't know anything about the country beyond the tourist cliches, beaches and temples and spicy food. But that didn't matter. I wasn't going for Thailand. I was going for the elephants. The sanctuary website showed photos of elderly elephants rescued from logging operations, baby elephants orphaned by poaching, injured elephants recovering from landmines. The descriptions were heartbreaking. The work was vital. Volunteers paid their own way and contributed labor. No veterinary skills required for general volunteering, but they welcomed vet professionals who could help with medical care. Perfect. The flight was 13 hours, including a stopover in Dubai. I arrived at Chiang Mai Airport exhausted and disoriented. The heat was different from what I'd expected, dry rather than humid. The mountains visible in the distance were hazy with smoke. Later, I'd learned this was burning season when farmers cleared fields. But in that moment, stepping out of the airport, it just looked mystical, like something from a different world. I took a taxi to the old city, checked into a guest house near Tha Phai Gate. Cheap place, basic room, shared bathroom down the hall. I didn't care. This wasn't about comfort. This was about the work. The sanctuary was an hour outside the city. Taxi up winding mountain roads. Jungle on both sides. I saw elephants from the road, working animals carrying tourists. The driver explained these were trekking camps, different from rescue sanctuaries. The distinction seemed important, though I didn't fully understand why. We arrived at a property with a hand-painted sign. The woman who ran the place was British, mid-50s, been in Thailand for 20 years. Started the sanctuary after visiting logging camps and seeing the conditions. She gave me a tour. 8 elephants, all elderly, all with histories of abuse or injury. One had a paralyzed trunk from nerve damage. Another had lost part of her foot to a landmine. They were magnificent and heartbreaking in equal measure. I felt tears in my eyes watching them. This was what I'd been missing. This was what mattered. I spent 3 weeks volunteering. My days started at 6, preparing food. Elephants eat enormous amounts. Bananas and sugarcane and pumpkins. Chopping and hauling. Then leading them to the river for baths. Checking them for injuries or infections. I used my veterinary training to examine wounds. Mix medications. Advise on treatment protocols. The British woman was grateful. Said qualified vets rarely volunteered. Most people were gap-year students with no medical background. Having someone who actually knew animal medicine was invaluable. I felt useful. Felt like my 42 years of training and practice had finally found their proper application. I was helping creatures that genuinely needed help, doing work that actually mattered. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. On my last week, a young Thai woman came to visit the sanctuary. She said she was a tour guide, brought groups to visit occasionally. She was interested in animal welfare. Wanted to learn more about sanctuary operations. The British woman introduced us. Said this was Chutama, very passionate about elephant conservation. Had dreams of starting her own sanctuary someday. Chutima was 29, spoke excellent English with an American accent. Explained she'd studied tourism management at Chiang Mai University. Spent a year in California on exchange. She asked me about my veterinary background, about what had brought me to Thailand. I told her the whole story. The decades of unfulfilling work. The late realization that I wanted my life to mean something. The discovery that this work, this specific work with rescued elephants, was what I'd been searching for. She listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, seemed to understand exactly what I meant. Before I left, she gave me her phone number. Said if I ever came back to Chiang Mai, she'd be happy to show me other elephant projects in the area, places that needed veterinary support. I thanked her, told her I'd definitely be in touch. I flew back to the UK in February, moved through my empty flat like a ghost. Everything felt colorless after Thailand. The gray skies and cold drizzle, and the profound meaninglessness of my daily routine. I'd go to Tesco and buy food I didn't really want, watch television programs I didn't care about, go to bed at 9 because there was nothing else to do. My children called occasionally, dutiful rather than enthusiastic. They had their own lives, their own problems. I was a checkbox they ticked once a month. Call dad. Done. Back to their real lives. I couldn't blame them. I'd never been particularly present during their childhoods. Always working, always tired. They'd learned early that I wasn't someone to come to for emotional support or meaningful conversation. We'd settled into a polite distance that felt permanent. 3 months after returning, I emailed Chutima. Said I was thinking about coming back to Chiang Mai, maybe for a longer stay this time. Would she have time to show me those other elephant projects she'd mentioned? She replied within hours. Said she'd love to. Said there was actually a really interesting opportunity she wanted to discuss with me. Something that aligned perfectly with what I'd told her about wanting meaningful work. Could we talk on the phone? I called her that evening. She explained that her family owned land in the mountains, 14 rai, about 5.5 acres, perfect location for an elephant sanctuary. Close enough to Chiang Mai to attract volunteers and donors, but remote enough to give elephants space and privacy. Her family wanted to develop it, but lacked the capital and expertise. They needed a partner, someone with veterinary knowledge and funding, someone who understood animal welfare and could help build something legitimate. Not another tourist trap, but a real rescue operation that prioritized elephant well-being. She'd been thinking about what I'd said during my visit, about wanting my life's work to matter, about spending 42 years in a job that felt meaningless. This could be it. This could be the thing I'd been searching for. A chance to build something from nothing. To create a sanctuary that would help elephants for decades. To leave a legacy that actually meant something. I should have been suspicious. Should have asked why her family hadn't developed the land themselves. Should have wondered why they needed a foreign partner if the opportunity was so obviously valuable. Should have questioned everything, but I didn't because Chutima was telling me exactly what I wanted to hear, that my skills mattered, that my resources could change lives, that I could build something meaningful from the wreckage of my purposeless existence. I wanted to believe her so badly that I didn't allow myself to examine the proposition critically. This was the universe finally offering me the thing I'd been searching for. I wasn't going to ruin it with excessive skepticism. I flew back to Thailand in June, dry season. Chutima picked me up from the airport. We drove straight up to the land. It was everything she'd described. 14 rai of gently sloping hillside, mountain views, stream running through the lower section, existing trees that could provide shade, close to a village with road access but far enough away to feel private. I walked the property imagining where buildings would go. Elephant enclosures here, veterinary clinic there, volunteer accommodation along this ridge, food prep area near the stream. It was perfect. More than perfect. It was exactly the kind of place I would have designed if I'd sat down and planned my ideal sanctuary from scratch, which in retrospect should have been another warning sign. When reality aligns too perfectly with your fantasies, you're either extraordinarily lucky or being told exactly what you want to hear. I was the latter, but I convinced myself I was the former. Chutima explained the financial structure. Her family would contribute the land, valued at 2 million baht, about 48,000 pounds at the exchange rate then. I would contribute capital for construction and initial operations. We'd structure it as a partnership, 60% me, 40% her family, proportional to financial input. All profit would be split accordingly, though, of course, the goal wasn't profit. The goal was animal welfare. Any revenue from volunteers or donations would go straight back into operations, expanding capacity, rescuing more elephants, building the best sanctuary in northern Thailand. I'd have full control over veterinary decisions. She'd handle tourism and volunteer coordination. Her family would manage local relationships and Thai regulatory requirements. It made sense. Everyone contributing what they could, all working toward the same goal. I asked how much capital would be required. She'd done projections. Construction would cost approximately 12 million baht, about 288,000 pounds. This would cover elephant enclosures, shade structures, a veterinary clinic, volunteer accommodation, food prep facilities, and fencing. We'd also need 5 million baht for initial operating costs. Purchasing elephants from bad situations, feeding and medical care for the first year until donation revenue stabilized, salaries for mahouts and support staff. Total, 17 million baht, about 408,000 pounds. I had 735,000 pounds total, more than enough. I'd still have over 300,000 pounds remaining as a safety buffer. The investment made financial sense. More importantly, it made moral sense. This was what my money should be used for. Not sitting in a bank account earning minimal interest while I waited to die, but actually doing something, creating something, saving lives. I told Chutima I was in. She said we'd need to formalize everything legally. Property partnership agreements, construction contracts, operating bylaws. She knew a lawyer in Chiang Mai who specialized in foreign business partnerships, very experienced. Had helped dozens of expats set up legitimate operations in Thailand. I should meet with him. Get everything properly documented. I agreed. Of course, everything should be legal and documented. That was basic due diligence. The lawyer's office was in a modern building near the night bazaar. He spoke reasonable English, explained Thai property law. Foreigners couldn't own land directly, but could own structures built on leased land, could also hold shares in Thai companies that owned land. The standard approach was a 49% foreign ownership with 51% Thai ownership to comply with regulations. But for our sanctuary partnership, we'd structure it differently. The land would remain in her family's name. I'd own the buildings and improvements. We'd have a 50-year lease giving me secure rights. If anything happened, the lease was transferable or refundable. All very standard, all very safe. I signed documents, pages and pages in Thai with English summaries. The lawyer assured me everything protected my interests. Chutima assured me everything was fair. I believed them both because I wanted to believe them. I transferred 408,000 pounds to Chutima's Thai bank account, converted to 17 million baht. She explained we'd move it into a company account once the partnership paperwork was finalized. For now, holding it in her personal account was simpler, avoided delays. I didn't question this. She was my partner. We were building something together. Of course, I trusted her with the money. That's what partnerships were. Trust. Construction began in July. Chutima sent me photos weekly. Foundation work for the main buildings. Bamboo structures going up for elephant shelters. Fencing being installed. It looked legitimate. Looked like actual progress. I flew out to visit in September. Wanted to see the site in person. Chutima picked me up from the airport. Said we'd go up to the land the next morning. That evening we had dinner in the old city. She was warm and enthusiastic. Showed me updated plans. Talked about which elephants we might rescue first. Discussed volunteer recruitment strategies. Everything felt real and tangible and full of promise. I felt happy. Genuinely happy. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was part of something meaningful. Something that would outlast me. Something that mattered. We drove up to the land the next morning. I was expecting to see buildings in various stages of construction. What I saw was bamboo framing and not much else. Chutima explained there had been delays, rainy season complications, labor shortages, material delivery problems, all very normal for construction in rural Thailand. Things moved slower here, had to learn patience, Jayen, cool heart. Everything would be finished soon, maybe 2 more months. I walked the site. The bamboo structures were flimsy. Didn't look like they could support roofing. Certainly didn't look like they could house elephants. I mentioned this to Chutima. She said the bamboo was temporary, just to establish the footprint. The actual structures would be concrete and steel, much sturdier. The bamboo just helped visualize the layout. This made sense. I was being impatient, expecting British construction timelines in rural Thailand. That was unfair and unrealistic. I needed to adjust my expectations, trust the process. Everything would work out. I stayed 2 weeks, visited the site every few days. Progress was slow. Some days it seemed like nothing had changed. Chutima always had explanations. Workers called in sick. Materials hadn't arrived. Inspections were pending. All reasonable. All plausible. I flew back to the UK telling myself everything was fine. Construction was just slower than I'd anticipated. Common problem in developing countries. Nothing to worry about. The sanctuary would be operational by the end of the year. Everything would work out. By November, Chutima was asking for more money. Said costs had exceeded projections. Concrete was more expensive than quoted. Steel prices had increased. Labor costs were higher because workers were in demand. Nothing outrageous. Just the normal budget overruns that occur in any construction project. She needed another 3 million baht, about 72,000 pounds, to complete construction properly, to not cut corners that might compromise elephant welfare. I transferred the money. What choice did I have? We were already in this deep. Couldn't abandon the project halfway through. Had to see it through to completion. Sunk cost fallacy perfectly executed, but I didn't recognize it at the time. Just thought I was being a responsible partner, ensuring we built something properly, not taking shortcuts that might harm animals. I flew back in January, 1 year after my initial volunteer stint, 1 year since meeting Chutima, 1 year since believing I'd found purpose. The site looked essentially unchanged from September. The bamboo framing was still there, still flimsy, still temporary looking, no concrete, no steel, no permanent structures of any kind. Chutima picked me up from the airport with her usual warmth, said there had been more delays, regulatory problems, permit issues. The local government was being difficult, demanding bribes. Fighting it would mean years of delays. Better to pay and move forward. She needed another 2 million baht, about 48,000 pounds, to handle the regulatory situation. Get permits approved. Once that was done, construction could proceed rapidly. Everything would be finished by April. I was losing patience, asked to see receipts, documentation, proof of where the money was going. She got defensive, said I didn't trust her, said she was working day and night on this project, sacrificing her own money and time, and I was accusing her of what? Theft? I backed down, apologized, said I was just frustrated with delays. She softened, said she understood, said she was frustrated too, but this was Thailand. Things moved differently here. Couldn't force Western expectations onto Eastern realities. I needed to be flexible, patient. Everything would work out. I didn't transfer the additional money immediately. Said I needed time to think. Flew back to the UK feeling uneasy. Started researching Thai construction timelines, Thai business partnerships, Thai property law. What I found was disturbing. Multiple forum posts about foreign investment scams. Partners who took money and produced nothing. Properties that never materialized. Construction projects that stalled indefinitely while consuming endless capital. The stories were eerily similar to my situation. I told myself my situation was different. Chutima wasn't like that. Our partnership was legitimate. I'd met her at a real sanctuary. She clearly cared about animal welfare. This wasn't a scam. Just a construction project experiencing normal delays in a developing country. I was being paranoid, being influenced by cynical expats who assumed all Thais were dishonest. That was racist and unfair. I was better than that. I transferred the 2 million baht in February. Told myself it was the last time. Told myself once permits were approved, everything would move forward. By March, Chutima was asking for another 1 million baht. Equipment costs. By April, she needed 500,000 baht for worker wages. By May, another million for materials. Each request came with detailed explanations. Each explanation was plausible individually. But together they formed a pattern I was refusing to acknowledge. I'd transferred a total of 590,000 pounds, 23 million baht, far more than the initial 17 million we'd agreed on. And the sanctuary looked exactly the same as it had a year earlier. Bamboo framing, overgrown land, no elephants, no facilities, no progress. I stopped sending money in June. Told Chutima I needed to see actual construction progress before investing more. She said that was fair. Said she understood my frustration. Said construction would accelerate now that all permits were in place. She sent photos in July. The bamboo had been removed. The site was cleared. This was presented as progress. Clearing for actual construction. I looked at the photos carefully. The land looked exactly how it had looked before any construction started. Empty, undeveloped, just scrubland and grass. We'd gone backwards. I called Chutima, asked what happened to all the structures I'd seen. She said they'd been temporary, had to be removed to build proper facilities. The new construction would begin soon. I asked when. She said soon. Soon became a word that meant nothing. In August, I flew back to Thailand without telling Chutima. Rented a car at Chiang Mai airport. Drove up to the land myself. No one was there. No construction equipment. No materials. No workers. Just empty land. 14 rai of nothing. I walked the property. There was no evidence any construction had ever occurred. No concrete foundations. No drainage. No utilities. Nothing. Just undeveloped hillside, exactly as it would have been before humans touched it. I felt sick, physically nauseous. 590,000 pounds. 23 million baht. All the money I had beyond my pension. Gone. Spent on nothing. On a fantasy. On a lie I desperately wanted to believe. I drove to the land registry office in Chiang Mai City, hired a translator, asked them to check the title deed for the property. The clerk seemed confused by my request but complied, pulled the documents, showed me the records. The land was owned by someone named Narong, not Chutima's family. There was a mortgage against it. 8 million baht, about 192,000 pounds. The mortgage had been taken out in September the previous year, 1 month after I'd first visited the site. 1 month after I'd transferred the initial 408,000 pounds. The land wasn't worth 2 million baht as Chutima had claimed. It was mortgaged for 8 million. Someone had borrowed money using this property as collateral. The money had gone somewhere, but it hadn't gone into building a sanctuary. I sat in my rental car outside the land registry office trying to process what I'd learned. Chutima's family didn't own the land. Someone named Narong did. And Narong had mortgaged it for 8 million baht right after I'd made my initial investment. Which meant either Narong was part of the scam or Chutima had somehow convinced someone to mortgage their land as part of an elaborate scheme to extract money from a naive British veterinarian who desperately wanted to believe his life could have meaning. Either way, I'd been comprehensively defrauded. The partnership was fiction. The construction was theater. The entire elephant sanctuary was a story told to separate me from my money, and it had worked perfectly. I called Chutima that evening, told her I'd visited the land, told her I'd checked the title deed, asked her to explain. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said things were complicated. Said her family's ownership was structured in a way that might not appear obvious in official records. Said the mortgage was temporary. Used to cover costs while we waited for my investment to clear international banking. All would be resolved soon. Just needed patience. Her explanations were increasingly frantic, increasingly implausible. I told her I wanted my money back. All of it. 590,000 pounds. She said that was impossible. The money had been spent on construction and permits and fees. She couldn't just produce that kind of cash. I said she'd defrauded me. Said I'd go to the police. She said good luck with that. Said I'd signed documents I didn't understand. Said I'd transferred money voluntarily. Said Thai police wouldn't help a Farang who'd made bad business decisions. She was probably right about that. I'd researched enough to know that Thai courts rarely ruled in favor of foreigners in business disputes, especially when the foreigner had signed Thai language contracts they couldn't read. I hired a lawyer in Chiang Mai, different one from the original lawyer who'd helped set up the partnership. That lawyer was almost certainly in on the scheme. The new lawyer reviewed all my documents, shook his head, said the contracts were essentially worthless. They appeared to give me ownership of buildings that didn't exist on land I didn't own. The lease was with Chutima personally, not with the actual landowner. Even if I could enforce the lease, there was nothing to lease. No structures, no improvements. Just bare land that someone else owned and had mortgaged for 8 million baht. The lawyer said I could try to pursue legal action. Would cost about 20,000 pounds in legal fees. Would take years. Might recover nothing. Thai courts were unpredictable, often favored locals over foreigners. He'd seen dozens of similar cases. Very few ended with the foreigner recovering significant amounts. Most ended with the foreigner spending more money on lawyers than they recovered in judgments. His advice was to accept the loss and move on. I tried anyway, filed a police report, met with officers who seemed polite but uninterested. They took my statement, asked if I had proof of fraud. I showed them the bank transfers, the title deed showing land I didn't own, the contracts promising buildings that didn't exist. They said this was a civil matter, business dispute, not criminal. I should pursue it through courts. I said this was fraud, deliberate deception. They said I'd need to prove intent to defraud. Prove Chutima knew she was lying rather than circumstances simply changing. That would be difficult. Better to resolve through civil proceedings. They filed a report, gave me a reference number. I never heard from them again. I spent 2 months in Chiang Mai pursuing the case, met with lawyers, filed court documents. Each step cost money. Each step produced nothing. The lawyer finally told me directly. I was wasting time and money. The case was weak. The evidence was ambiguous. Thai courts were unlikely to rule in my favor even if we went to trial. And going to trial would cost another 30,000 pounds easily, with no guarantee of success. Better to accept I'd been scammed and move on with my life. I asked what happened to people like Chutima, people who ran schemes like this. He shrugged, said usually nothing. They'd move to another city, find another foreigner, run the same scheme. Unless someone died or lost everything and made a huge public fuss, the authorities weren't interested. Too many cases, too little resources. And honestly, some officials probably got kickbacks from the scammers. Endemic problem. Nothing I could do about it. I flew back to the UK in October, 16 months after investing in the sanctuary. 16 months after believing I'd found purpose. I had 145,000 pounds left. My pension would provide another 20,000 pounds annually. Enough to live on if I was careful. Not enough to ever do anything significant again. Not enough to rebuild what I'd lost. Not enough to try again to find meaning in my remaining years. I'd gambled everything on a fantasy and lost. The elephant sanctuary that was going to give my life purpose was empty land I never owned with a mortgage I never knew about paid for with my life savings. I moved into a smaller flat in Woking, 1 bedroom. Cheap place in a building full of other pensioners living on limited means. I see my children occasionally. They know something went wrong in Thailand. Know I lost money. Don't know the full extent. I'm too ashamed to tell them. Too humiliated to admit I spent 590,000 pounds on nothing. On a story told by a woman I barely knew who saw me coming from a kilometer away. An aging veterinarian desperate for meaning. Desperate to believe his life could matter. Desperate enough to ignore every warning sign and question nothing until it was far too late. Looking back, I can see all the moments I should have known better. Should have questioned more. Should have verified everything independently instead of trusting Chutima's explanations. But I also understand why I didn't. Because questioning would have meant admitting the sanctuary might not be real, might not happen. And if the sanctuary wasn't real, then I was back where I started. A 66-year-old retired veterinarian with no purpose and no prospect of ever finding one. That reality was so unbearable that I chose the fantasy instead. Chose to believe in the elephant sanctuary because believing in it was easier than facing the emptiness of my actual life. The scam worked because I needed it to work, because I wanted so desperately to believe I could still matter, could still do something meaningful with the years I had left, could still find the purpose I'd been searching for my entire adult life. I realize now that Chudama didn't create the scam from nothing. She identified what I needed most and offered it to me. Purpose, meaning, a chance to matter. She understood that a man who'd spent 42 years in a job he found meaningless would pay almost anything for a chance at redemption. Would ignore obvious warning signs if the alternative was accepting that meaning might never come. She was absolutely right. I would pay anything. Did pay everything. £590,000 for a phantom sanctuary that existed only in my desperate imagination. The philosophical part of me, the part that spent years reading about Buddhism and seeking enlightenment, wants to find some lesson in this. Some wisdom about attachment and desire and the suffering they cause. Maybe there is wisdom here. Maybe I had to lose everything to understand that meaning can't be purchased. That purpose can't be built with money on land you don't own. That the search for significance through external accomplishments is fundamentally flawed. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to salvage something valuable from the wreckage of my retirement. Trying to pretend this catastrophic mistake taught me something profound, when really it just demonstrated that I'm a naive old man who got scammed because he was too desperate and too stupid to see what was happening right in front of him. I volunteer at a local animal shelter now, 2 days a week, cleaning cages, walking dogs, basic care work, nothing significant. Nothing that will change the world or save endangered species. Just helping a few dogs and cats in Woking find homes. It's not what I dreamed of, not the meaningful legacy I imagined building. But it's real. The animals exist. The shelter exists. When I feed a dog, that dog actually eats the food. When I clean a cage, that cage is actually clean. Everything is verifiable and tangible and real. There are no mortgages on land I don't own. No phantom construction on properties that don't exist. Just simple work that accomplishes small things. Maybe that's enough. Maybe chasing grand purpose was always the problem. Maybe the real work was always the unglamorous daily effort to help individual creatures one at a time. Maybe I knew that 42 years ago and forgot somewhere along the way. Maybe I needed to lose £590,000 to remember it. If you're reading this and you're thinking about investing in conservation projects in developing countries, especially if you're doing it because you're searching for meaning or purpose, I want to tell you something important. Your desire for significance makes you vulnerable, makes you a target. People who run these scams are very good at identifying what you need most and offering it to you. They understand that someone searching for purpose will ignore warning signs that seem obvious in retrospect. Will explain away inconsistency because acknowledging them means abandoning the dream. They're professionals. They've done this before. They know exactly how to extract maximum money while providing minimum product. And they know that by the time you figure it out, you'll be too ashamed to pursue them aggressively. Too embarrassed to admit publicly how thoroughly you were fooled. Do your due diligence. Independently verify everything. Don't trust translations provided by your business partner. Hire your own translator. Check property records yourself. Visit the land registry. Confirm ownership. Look for encumbrances and mortgages. Visit construction sites unannounced. Take photos. Ask hard questions and demand documentary proof of answers. If someone gets defensive when you ask questions, that's a warning sign. If explanations become increasingly elaborate and implausible, that's a warning sign. If progress is always just around the corner pending one more payment, that's a warning sign. If documents are in a language you don't understand and you're told not to worry about it, that's a warning sign. Trust is earned slowly, not given freely to people you barely know just because they tell you what you want to hear. More fundamentally, examine why you're really doing this. If you're investing in a conservation project because you genuinely understand the work and want to support it, fine. But if you're doing it because you're searching for meaning or purpose or trying to give your life significance, stop. That's the wrong reason. That's the vulnerable place these scams exploit. Meaning and purpose can't be purchased, can't be built with money, can't be achieved through grand projects in exotic locations. Those things come from daily effort, from showing up consistently for unglamorous work, from helping individual creatures one at a time without expecting recognition or feeling like you're saving the world. That's the real work. The rest is fantasy. Expensive, destructive fantasy that will cost you everything while producing nothing. I'm 66 years old. I have 145,000 pounds left. I live in a one-bedroom flat in Woking. I volunteer at an animal shelter 2 days a week. This is what remains after spending 590,000 pounds on an elephant sanctuary that was just empty land with someone else's mortgage attached. I'm not bitter. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. I'm just tired. Tired of searching for purpose. Tired of believing life needs some grand meaning. Tired of thinking my 42 years of veterinary work were wasted because they didn't feel significant enough. Maybe they were enough. Maybe helping Mrs. Henderson's cat was enough. Maybe all of it was enough, and I just couldn't see it because I was too busy searching for something more. Something bigger. Something that would make me feel like I mattered. The elephant sanctuary never existed. The partnership was fiction. The construction was theater. The purpose I thought I'd found was a fantasy sold by someone who understood exactly what I needed to hear. 590,000 pounds bought me nothing but that understanding. Nothing but the knowledge that searching for external meaning is a trap. That purpose can't be purchased. That significance isn't built on land you don't own. Maybe that's worth knowing. Maybe it cost exactly what it needed to cost for me to learn it. Or maybe I'm just trying to make sense of senseless loss, trying to find wisdom in waste, trying to believe the universe has some peculiar sense of humor about these things, when really it's just random cruelty delivered efficiently by people who are very good at their jobs. I don't check property records compulsively. Don't verify land ownership for projects I'm not involved in. Don't warn every pensioner I meet about conservation scams. I just go to the shelter twice a week. Feed dogs, clean cages. Help where I actually can rather than where I imagine I should. That's what 590,000 pounds bought me. The understanding that the small real work matters more than the grand imaginary work. That's either wisdom or rationalization. I'm not sure which. Maybe there's no difference. Maybe in the end we tell ourselves whatever stories we need to keep going. Mine is that the elephant sanctuary that never existed taught me to value the animal shelter that does. Whether that's true or just a useful fiction I've constructed to make the loss bearable, I honestly can't say anymore. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the only thing that matters is showing up tomorrow and the day after and the day after that to do work that's real enough to verify and small enough to actually accomplish. That's what remains. That's what I have. And somehow, against all reason and expectation, it's enough.